But I'll kick it off, and I have plenty of questions, but I think we'd like to be able to answer all the questions that you have, too. So my first one, Julian, I think we ought to begin at the beginning, don't you think? And so I think since there's been so much discussion here on genes and environment, tell us a little bit about your parents and your early years. Where'd you come from? Where'd you grow up? You know?
I think I know, yes.
You do? Good.
Yes. I grew up in Atlanta, near Atlanta, in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, and my mother was a registered nurse, and my father had about a sixth grade education and did various things, real estate, house building, ran a gasoline truck route, did things of that kind. And it was a lower middle class community. There was very little intellectual stimulation in the community, but we had nothing but academics in the school because they had nothing else. We had no music to speak of, no drama, no voice training, no instrumental training. So we just studied algebra. The high school I attended was a 11-year school system, so I got through it at age 15 before I was 16 years old. And the curriculum was fixed. Everybody took 2 years of algebra and geometry, and everybody took 2 years of Latin and 2 years of another foreign language. So we did get a pretty good academic education. I was glad for that. But the nice fringe things were missing from the community because it was pretty much of a lower middle class community and working class community.
Now, when you went through school, did you go through every single grade, or did you get skipped?
I skipped. It's rather strange. I was in the first grade. I made all C's. I remember the teacher said I kept my feet on the desk, and that disturbed her. And, there were no kindergartens in those days, so there was no preparation for first grade. You just went to first grade, and they started telling you what 1 + 1 was, and A, B, C, D, and so forth. But in second grade, I made all A's. In the third grade, I made all A's, and the teacher said to my mother, "Your son doesn't need to go to the fourth grade." So, although no one asked me, I would have said I didn't want to go skip a grade, but I skipped the fourth grade, went on to the fifth grade, leaving my girlfriend behind, my dearly beloved girlfriend, and my boyfriend behind. And socially, it wasn't as good a move as I would have liked because it took a long time to get back in track socially after that. So I went on through the 11-year system. As I say, I finished at 15. I then went to a state residential junior college. We were a rather poor family, and this was an inexpensive place. Pretty good place, actually. The teachers were good. And after that, I went to State Teachers College, which was okay in some respects. I liked organic chemistry, but I didn't like those education courses much. They were pretty dull. So I got through in 1 year. So I ended up at barely 19. I was 19 in July, and I finished in August. And I went out teaching in a great big school in Atlanta, Georgia, big high school. At 19, taught a whole year before I was 19, taught 2 years before I could vote. I remember one day one of the students, who was a 10th grader, came to me at study hall and said, "Mr. Stanley, why don't we go out and vote together today?" And I couldn't tell him that I couldn't vote. He was 10th grade and he could vote. He was 21 already. So my professional life has been a total of 65 years so far because I started so early in 1937. And I've been, aside from some detour during the war years when I spent 44 months in the Air Force, been entirely devoted to professional things. I did retire technically in 1984 from Hopkins, quit teaching, but I hang around the place a couple of days a week for about 8 hours a couple of days a week and do various things there now. And I've published some. I have an article coming out in Education and Psychological Measurement soon, and some other things in the works.
Well, going back again, just one more thing I'd like to pick up on. When you were accelerated, did you stand out in any way? Did everybody notice you because you were smaller than average?
I was a great big guy. No, I had no trouble. On my 12th birthday, I was 5 feet 10.5 inches tall, weighed 145 pounds. And I was almost a giant. My best friend weighed 88 pounds. And people thought I was mentally retarded because he had this great big guys around this little kid. So it wasn't entirely a help. But on the other hand, it kept me from looking so conspicuous as if I'd been 4 feet tall.
So at the time, if somebody had asked you, you wouldn't have wanted to accelerate, but now you're looking back on your experiences, do you think it was the right decision, or are you glad you did it?
Well, it made me more academic, I'm pretty sure, because I lacked, in 5th, 6th, and 7th grades, I lacked a good deal of social life, because I wasn't in with my age, not a lot of my age groups, but it's just my friends. I moved to a big elementary school where I knew nobody, and nobody knew me, and I think that probably I benefited in the long run from a more academic approach. I never was very good mechanically. My father was a mechanical, not genius, but a very able fellow mechanically, and one day in disgust he said to me, "Son, you better make your living with your brain because you'll never make it with your hands." And that's one about the best advice I ever got in my life, I think.
Well, you know, you have spent a lifetime making sure, or at least half of a lifetime, making sure that bright kids aren't bored. Yet, when I remember back to Hopkins days and you reminisced about your days during World War II, you said that boredom was your greatest stimulator for you to actually achieve even more.
You know, World War II was a great favor for me, although I didn't think so at the time. 28 months overseas and 44 months in the service, which was the exact duration of World War II, was a great deal. But the GI Bill came along, and I'd been a fairly casual undergraduate student at this, this rudimentary teacher's college. So I thought, well, I'm still single, I'm 27, I'll take advantage of this GI Bill. I'll go to a good school. I've been going to these routine schools, and I'll go to a real good one. So I applied to Harvard and Yale and Chicago and Columbia, and I got into Harvard for the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I went up there 8 years after I'd finished my bachelor's at this teacher's college, and I was terrified. I thought, I'm going to flunk out of this place. This is a tough place. And I worked extremely hard, and I discovered I like to work extremely hard. I like to do important things. The students who had been there during the war sent a representative at one point to ask me not to work so hard. I was running the grade curve, they said. I got A pluses, they got B minuses. So, but I kept working hard, and I overdid it pretty badly. Made too good of grades and established too much of a reputation, and I had to keep it up. I think I would have settled to be a B student if I'd known how to be one, but I didn't have any clue as to what to do. But it was interesting that there was a fellow in my class, you know, one of these marker people, I would call him, who was the grandson of a Nobel laureate and the son of a professor in the medical school at Harvard. And he was a graduate of the Groton School and Harvard, cum laude from Harvard. And I discovered to my great surprise that I was as able as he was, and I knew as much as he did. I couldn't believe that after the routine background. But one thing I need to tell you, I did teach school 4.5 years. I taught a variety of subjects 4.5 years before the war. So I, in effect, had 3 careers. I've been a teacher, high school teacher, regular tenured high school teacher, 4.5 years. And then from after the war and after my doctoral training at Harvard, I had from 1949 to 71 a career in psychometrics, and I was enjoying it. But then about that time, I got a big grant from the Spencer Foundation to work with mathematically talented youngsters, and that took me out of the psychometric area almost entirely. And so I've had basically 3 different careers, and I've enjoyed all of them. But it's been wonderful to be able to shift from one to the other, and not just be stuck in something. The last thing I did that was, I guess, a major contribution, I hope, was a big, long chapter on reliability theory in the educational measurement handbook that Bob Thorndike edited. And I worked hard. I was at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences for a couple of years, and I had time to really work on it. But when I got through with the chapter, some of you know that chapter probably, reliability theory, classical theory, very heavily mathematical treatment. I began to think, well, sure, Lee Cronbach can understand this, and Jay Middleman and a few others, but I don't know what I've done here. I've written a treatise which is useful as a reference for the people who can use it, but which is not intelligible to a lot of people. So about that time, I got this grant from the Spencer Foundation, and I thought, well, I'll go and help people. My original value orientation had been very highly theoretical and somewhat social and somewhat aesthetic, but over the years, I think the social began to creep up, and maybe the theoretical crept down a little. So I was now eager to help people, and that's why I got into working with mathematically talented youngsters. And serendipitously, I got the grant from a new foundation.
Now we're getting ahead of our story. Back to 1947.
Okay.
We'll get there, because I think there are some other interesting things.
I entered graduate school in 45. I finished in 49. We'll take us up to
Okay, we'll take you up there. I want to go back, because this is something that I really don't know. And so this is sometimes I know the answers to your questions. But, actually I do know this part, but the second part I don't know. So tell me, how did you find your area of specialization? So you went up to Harvard, you got in. So how did you find the area? Was there someone there who saw talent in you that sparked your interest, that said, oh, this is a talented man, I want to attract him to our field? Or what happened?
Well, I'm glad you said this, because otherwise it would sound like bragging a little, what I would say. I went there to get a master's degree in education and vocational guidance and counseling. I did do that. But I had the great fortune to work with the great Truman Kelly and with Bill Rulon and some other really good people, and I got interested in statistics. But one of the main things that happened the first semester there, I took Truman Kelly's statistics course. I'd had no statistics before. I had a little math, but no statistics. And I took a wonderful test theory course that Phil Rulon had designed. And at the end of the course Phil Rulon had designed, they had a 100-item multiple choice test on test theory, and had a 3-hour exam limit. We could work for 3 hours. Well, everybody else left after about an hour, but I sat there and I manicured the test, and I worked over every item back and forth, and I made the highest score I ever made in 4 years on the theory test. That brought me to the attention of Rulon, who was the dean by that time, and I became his favorite person in some ways. And also at Truman Kelly's course, he called me in afterwards and he said, how many courses in statistics have you had? And I said, just yours. He said, well, you scored at the 75th percentile of the third semester of my course. He used the same exam all through the 3 semesters. So those 2 things got me a reputation with Truman Kelly and Rulon and others there. And that's how it happened. And then I stayed on, took experimental design under Kelly, under Rulon later, and I didn't have really a whole lot of training in statistics. Most of my statistics later was self-learned. I became a specialist on the analysis of variance, and I taught that at Hopkins to graduate students for quite a while. It turned out I was very interested in algebra and very good at algebra, so I was able to do some things such as a 1961 psychometric article on Rayleigh trait matrices that followed up on the work that Don Campbell and Fisk had done earlier. I won't go any further with that. You will anticipate that.
You're a good interviewee. But as I recall, that you also told me about that I guess a coincidence happened too. Serendipity kind of led you into this field because you were also studying for some exam where you're having to read some book and you...
Oh, yeah, that was back in undergraduate work. I was taking a very dull course in rural sociology. I don't know why, but you had to have an elective in that field. And I went to the library to do my homework for rural sociology, but I was bored, so I looked around. I found a big old podball of book. Some of you who are old enough to remember it. It was Henry Goddard's Feeble-Mindedness, Its Causes and Consequences. It was the old Jukes and Cadillac and Edwards theory. So most of you are too young to even know about that, but it was the foundation of eugenics at the time. It was really a very bad book, but it's very alluring and interesting, and I think it sort of whetted my interest in intelligence from 1937 on. I certainly haven't swallowed the thing whole even then, but it was stimulating enough to get me started.
As I heard it, you were a great date because you always took intelligence tests with you. Is that's
No, after teaching a year, it's interesting, this little genetic comment. I had a wonderful sister, 20 months younger than I am. She's still alive. And she was a wonderful student in elementary school, except she was very poor at just what I was good at math. She had trouble with Algebra 1 in high school, and science courses, made A's in history and things like that. So the summer of 1938, after I taught for 1 year in school, I tutored her for 4 weeks, trying to get her through the physical science sequence so she'd graduate from college, so she wouldn't have trouble with it that way. But I got tired after 4 weeks, and I went down to the University of Georgia, and I took 2 easy courses. One was called, what I considered as a chemistry major, an easy course. One was adolescent psychology, and one was test and measurements. Well, I have more history on test and measurement maybe than anybody here, maybe including Art Jensen and possibly Jack Carroll, although we finished college the same year. This man, a fellow named Herbert Ritchie, whom nobody ever heard of because he was just a teacher, he wasn't a researcher, gave us all kinds of intelligence tests. That was what the test measurement course was. How many of you have ever seen the Miller Group test? And that's the antecedent of the Miller Analogies test. 40 analogies items, 40 vocabulary items, and 40 scrambled sentences items. Well, I got all 40 of the analogies right and all 40 of the vocabularies, but I had trouble with scrambled sentences. I learned for the first time that I'm not very good spatially. You know, to reorient these sentences. I think I got 32 of them right instead of 40. We had the American Psychological Exam, which most of you don't know about, but that used to be the standard entrance exam for college, a competitor with the SAT. We had the Ohio State University Psychological Exam, which was an entrance exam for Ohio State, and a number, and the old Otis quick scoring test. And I've discovered for the first time that I was just very good at all of these tests except the spatial type test. And the professor was impressed and got me a scholarship to go on for a master's, but I didn't do it. I was too, I guess, unmotivated. The scholarship was too small, so I didn't do it. I did only a little graduate work during the 4.5 years of teaching. Not much until I went on to graduate school after the war. But that was a fascinating course. I loved those tests. Of course, I was doing well on them. That makes you love them even more, I expect. It led to my doing a lot of test work. When I was on the faculty at Peabody, I guess I'm jumping the gun here, but I was on the faculty at Peabody College, just where we were here, from 1949 to 53, my first postdoctoral assignment. I did all the entrance testing, all the graduate testing. I just was immersed in. I taught the Binet course, taught test theory, test construction, all sorts of things. So for a while, I was mostly in measurement. Then when I went to Wisconsin in 1953, I got mostly into statistics then, test construction and statistics.
Well, so many people who have known you and have worked with you, and I think Rich would agree, and I know I feel that way, but others do too.
We have four of them here.
Yeah. Right. Well, one of the things that stands out about you is that you're such a wonderful mentor. And the depth of your mentoring, the caring, and how you get involved in our lives, and how you help us throughout our careers, it's at a level I've just never heard of anybody meeting the standard that you've set. And I was just wondering if you experienced that yourself, and so you decided you were going to continue that tradition, or what? Yeah. But who were your mentors, and were there wonderful mentors to you?
Well, I admired Kelly, Truman Kelly, and Rulon, but they weren't much help in that respect. Rulon was a pretty private person. So once, but I ran across someone, the older ones, from Frederick Davis, who was a great item analysis person. I ran across him, and he got me down to Peabody. He was chair of the department here of psychology. And then he brought me down and left at the end of the summer to go to Hunter College, so I was independent of him. But he was kind of a role model for a while. But I did something just intuitively, I guess. I read material from E.F. Lindquist and Palmer Johnson and Bob Ebel and people like that, and I wrote them critiques of their work. Now, I'm an unknown person down at Peabody. I'm writing them, but they appreciated it. They were, I guess, helpful, constructive criticisms. So I got to be good friends with Lindquist and Johnson and other people. So I had my mentors postdoctorally that way, but I didn't have the kind of wonderful experience that David Lubensky had, for instance, of being a postdoc at Illinois for a couple of years. That would have been helpful. Later, though, I made up for it. After I got to Wisconsin, I went on a Fulbright for a year to Belgium. I went on a postdoc in Department of Statistics in Chicago. I went out to the Center for Advanced Study of Behavioral Sciences for 2 years. So I did my postdoctoral work as a tenured associate professor, which is a little more secure, I think, than just doing it right away.
Well, if we're going to try to sum up your psychometric years, and you think about those until you did the switch, what piece of work do you think is your most important piece of work? What are you most proud of?
Well, the Campbell and Stanley book on experimental and quasi-experimental designs is clearly the most influential thing I've ever done by far. The book sold, it's a little book, under 100 pages. It sold 250,000 copies. It's used by almost everybody. How many of you actually used the book at some point? Quite a few of you did, yeah. Right. It was used when I was at Stanford at the Center for Advanced Study of Behavioral Sciences. It was being used in education, psychology, history, and sociology at one point. So that clearly was the most influential. Now, the best piece of psychometric work I did is the article in Psychometrica, the most complex work I ever did. The most tedious one, hardest working one, was the reliability chapter. But I was prominent in the literature as soon as I got my doctorate in 1949, finished my doctorate. My mentor and I, who was an experimental psychologist, because I finished, oddly enough, in experimental psychology with rats on a T-maze in a partial reinforcement learning study, I worked up a review of the literature on partial reinforcement with Bill Jenkins. Oh, incidentally, he was one of my mentor. He was my direct mentor for my dissertation. I was technically Rulon's student, but Rulon didn't care anything about rats on T-mazes, so he didn't do anything. But talking about serendipity, to digress a little bit, I was stuck with a lot of rats when Hobart Mara was another one of the presidents of APA later, was one of my professors, and I got my experimental psychology training under Mara, but he departed for Illinois as a research professor. It was interesting, the Harvard Graduate School of Education at the end of World War II was a holding station, a temporary holding station for a number of people. Mara went to Illinois as a full professor from an associate professorship. Bob Sears was there. Later, he went on to Stanford. But what Mara did was to leave me with a huge colony of rats. And if you ever, I'm fond of those rats, but if you ever fool with rats, you know how fast they breed, 14 to a litter, and every week or two it seemed. So I was overwhelmed. So I put up signs all over the campus and said, "Rats, I'll give you hooded rats. You know, hooded rats have markings. They're not albinos. And white rats, lashless gray string. Have your choice. Come get them." So people came around while Jack Getzells from Chicago showed up and got some rats from me. And here this guy named Bill Jenkins comes, and I know him very well because I'm citing him in my study. He's the leading researcher in the field of partial reinforcement at the time. And that's how I got my doctoral dissertation advisor. Just informally, he was a Social Science Research Council postdoc there himself. But he'd been well-trained and extremely rigorous person. But I didn't persist when I came down to Peabody and Vanderbilt. I didn't persist in the experimental psychology field. I don't know, I may have been a little tired of rats. There were none down here. There was no rat colonies. So I went into the psychometric research methodology test theory area here and at Wisconsin. And until 1971 at Johns Hopkins also.
Tell me about how did Campbell and Stanley was written? Yeah. As I understand, it was a big commute or something. Isn't that true?
Well, I was in Belgium when I wrote the psychometric. I had plenty of time as a Fulbright. I was Fulbright, a research scholar. I didn't have to lecture. And I got interested in the statement Campbell and Fisk had made that there was no statistical way to evaluate the matrix they had. So I worked one out and sent it to Psychometric, and it was published. And I think I sent a copy early to a pre-publication copy to, I'm sure I did, to Campbell, so he could give me criticisms, comments on it. So he picked me up as his statistical person for the experimental and quasi-experimental design book And we commuted back and forth between University of Wisconsin and Northwestern, where he was. And he was a powerful influence on me too, because I don't think I ever knew a person who was a more fundamental thinker about research than he was. You couldn't snore him with t-tests and analyses of variance. He wanted to know fundamentally what you were doing. It was very wonderful to work with him for a while. We never did anything else together, except just keeping personal contact, but we had a wonderful year or so of working up that little book.
How was the authorship decided on that book?
Huh?
How was the authorship decided? Was that a flip of a coin? Is that what?
No. It belonged to Campbell, there's no doubt. He was the philosopher of science, and I did the statistical part, and I deserved second credit, but certainly not first credit for it. Another thing I did too, as long as we're mentioning these, I had a graduate student named Gene Glass. Some of you may know Gene Glass. He's done a lot of different things. He's now on the internet publishing, furthering internet publication, things of that kind. But he was my graduate student at Wisconsin, and we taught statistics together. So after he finished in 1965 at age 25, by 1970 he has a book in the making, and he gets me his co-author of the book. Some of you may have used the book. It's very good. I think a very good book. And that was another nice collaboration I had with him.
When talking about another student of yours, and I was just speaking to him a couple of weeks ago, and that's Andy Porter, and we were just reminiscing that we both had the same professional father. Yeah. And one of the things that he talked about, was of course the Lab of Experimental Design that you had founded at University of Wisconsin. And he said that one of the things that really stood out about you was the way you went about to find great graduate students. And it kind of foreshadows your later interest in a talent search, but he tells me that how you would, tell us how you would go and find the wonderful students who were, because you had incredible students in that Lab of Experimental Design while you ran it.
Yeah, I started that in 1961. I would, from various ways, the recommendation, I'd find about 50 students. We'd winnow them down to 4 or 5. We had an NDEA Title IV fellowship program, which was quite good. It paid all the expenses for 3 years for students, so it was a real prize. And I get about 50. We'd interview them and pick the very best of them. And the ones who were next best, we sent to a nearby university. We thought they needed them, and they did all right too that way. But it was a big recruiting function, finding the right people, because there's an old proverb, you can't make a silk purse out of salvia, and you have to find people with some considerable talent. Now, they came from all over the place. Gene Glass, for instance, who was really first rate, had majored in German at the University of Nebraska, but he was quantitatively very apt. We gave them the Miller-Analogous test and the Doppelt mathematical reasoning test, and they had to make very high scores on both of those to get in, and we recruited and interviewed and all. I remember that Gene Glass was headed for Princeton to be interviewed for the psychometric fellowship there, but he never went to Princeton after he passed. Well, what I did, I recruited some really good people, and then they helped me recruit the next batch. So they grabbed Gene by the arm and convinced him he should stay at Wisconsin and not go to Princeton for the psychometric fellowship interview there.
So who were some of the students you attracted there?
Well, Gene Glass was one. Andy Porter was another. He's the director of the research center at University of Wisconsin, and a fabulous fundraiser too, I might add. He runs a big shop there. He's also a professor of educational psychology. Larry Toothaker, whom you don't know, teaches statistics at Oklahoma. A fellow named Lindeman replaced Helen Walker at Teachers College Columbia as the statistics person and taught for many years. He retired recently, 30 years or more there. So that was quite a prestigious position to have. Helen Walker, as you know, some of you older ones know, was very famous as a statistics teacher and was the author of a wonderful textbook and the history of statistical what was the title? The History of Studies in the History of Statistical Method. That way, a wonderful book. David Wiley was a very promising student of mine. He was in Chicago as a professor, but he defected like my protege here to the deanship at Northwestern. He was dean of the School of Education there, which proved to be very helpful later on when I wanted to set up a gifted child program in the Midwest. There, I had a dean ready to set it up. Les McLean went on up to Ontario. Carl Berida, whom some of you know in educational psychology, went up there. Daniel Keating was a student of mine there. And there were a lot of others along the way.
Well, now let's go back to where you were.
Oh, incidentally, the students of mine here, Rich Haya, Cleve Gilmore was the early days that I was there, and Camilla and David Schroeder. Those were four of the ones, and they're all here and all presenting in one way or another.
All right, now back. Now in 1970 around, 1971, you really took a shift.
Yeah, right.
What prompted you to make that shift? And let's leave the psychometric areas and do the...
Okay. All during my psychometric career, dry bones methodologist, I sometimes call it, because it wasn't concerned with people, but with statistics and derivations and proofs and so forth. I had a latent interest in the gifted from my own experience as an early graduate and all. I wrote a few little pieces for a few journals. I once lectured to the Wisconsin State PTA Association on the gifted, just talked about them. And they liked the speech so well, they had me give it again that afternoon. I never have had that happen before or since, but one speech and the same speech that happened again. So I had a latent interest, but I was too busy with psychometrics and research design and all. Experimental design was my real specialty. And then in 1968, the summer of 68, a professor of computer science from Towson State University nearby conducted a course on campus for youngsters, 7th, 8th graders who were interested in computers. This was the early days, that would have been in 1968. And she had this young man named Joseph Bates who came and to learn about computers, but he ended up helping the graduate students with their Fortran programming. He was already that good. So I got interested in it. She called it to my attention, and I got somewhat interested in it, but I was busy, so not till next January did I. He just finished 7th grade when he came to this program, but by the fall, when he was an 8th grader, by January of 69, I got him and I had him take the SAT and achievement test in math and physics and maybe something else. There was no College Board achievement test in computer science, in which he was very good at programming languages. And he did so well that I began to cast around for something we could do with him that would help him, because it was obvious that he didn't need to be a 9th grader the next year. He was already way beyond 9th grade. He made something like nearly 700 on the College Board physics exam without taking physics, for instance. And he made 750 or so on the math 2 level College Board test. So I went to the high schools and I asked them if they'd let him take advanced placement courses for 11th and 12th graders, and they just laughed at me. They said that was ridiculous. He was just going to be a 9th grader, and they wouldn't do that. So I also went to the local technological school, high school, and asked them, and they turned him down. Later on, they gave an honorary diploma, I might add, from the school, because they felt so chastened by what he did later. Well, I talked with Joe, and I talked with his parents. He had a very fine father, a lawyer father, and we finally decided the only thing we could do was just put him in Johns Hopkins as a regular student at 13 until October of that year. And we worried he'd make C's and D's and have a hard time. So we'd put him, first of all, in the easy courses. We put him in calculus and physics and computer science. Those were the 3 courses he started with. Well, instead of making C's and D's, he made 2 A's and a B plus, as I remember. He handled it very well. And he went on 4 years and got not only a bachelor's, but also a master's in computer science at age 17. And he went on up to Cornell and got a PhD, and he's now doing research in virtual reality somewhere, using virtual reality for entertainment purposes. Well, that set me to thinking, but I heard the old proverb that one swallow doesn't make a spring. So I thought maybe I found the only kid in the world like that. How do I know that any others don't have a replication? Well, fortunately, there was a fairly irritable mother who came along. Don't quote me, it's irritable mother quote.
You're being taped.
She came along, and she was playing bridge with Joe's mother, and she found out about Joe, and she was filled with not only, well, I won't call it envy, but she came to me and said her son was at least as bright as Joe. He could do the same thing. Well, I was skeptical, so I sort of hazed the boy. I made him take the test, made him go to summer school, make A's in summer school to see that he was ready to come. Well, he was ready. He was 13 also. So he came to Hopkins, and he did well. Then a 10th grader came to me sobbing that he was bored to death in 10th grade. Would I please get him into Hopkins? So I did. He made 40 credits of A. And I thought Hopkins was too easy for him, probably. So I got him into Princeton, and he made A pluses in Princeton because they had an A plus at the time. Well, we kept on little things like that happen for several times, but by 1971, when the Spencer Foundation was created in Chicago, the death of Lyle Spencer, who founded Science Research Associates and made enough to leave $80 million to a foundation in 1971. There they were with a good deal of money, having to give away 5% a year according to federal regulations, and they didn't know where to give it, didn't have any applications. I happened to know the president slightly. He was the dean at Stanford, and I'd sat next to him at a dinner party a while back. And the executive secretary had been the secretary to the dean of, to the director of placement at Harvard, and I'd known her. In fact, at one point when I was single, I asked her for a date. I didn't get the date because she was engaged at the time, but she remembered me very favorably. So I wrote a 4.5-page double-spaced typewritten proposal, just casually. I didn't know much what I wanted to do. I wanted to help mathematically talented youngsters. I knew that. And I sent it in, and I got $256,100 for a 5-year period, which in those days was a lot of money to do something. And the president of the Spencer Foundation, Tom James, told me that if I worked intensely with 12 kids, he'd be happy. He'd be happy about it. Well, I had plenty of money, so I went out and I bought two people who applied for graduate school at Hopkins. And in fact, I might say they probably wouldn't have got in otherwise because they were a little different area from the physiological experimental area that Hopkins likes so well. Dan Keating and Lynn Fox. Lynn Fox is a dean at American U these days. Did all become deans, Camilla? No, Daniel Keating, I guess, is still up there.
I don't know what you taught us.
I didn't teach you that. Anyway, so we got moving, and we worked intensely. I don't know how I worked those graduate students half to death. They really worked. Dan Keating worked 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, and Lynn Fox worked about the same. And Dan finished his dissertation and his doctorate 28 months from the time he got his bachelor's, so he was really working on both angles there. But we experimented with various things, and but one of the helpful things we did, and you may not even know this, Camilla, possibly you do, before we got our grant on September the 1st of 1971, Dan and I went over to the library and we read up on all the gifted child literature, including the 5 volumes of Terman's Genetic Studies of Genius. We read that, and we read all the literature we could find, and we talked and discussed the field thoroughly, and we did get a fine grounding in it. But then we went on, we had 2 prongs. One prong was developed from Lita Hollingsworth's famous work at Teacher College, Columbia, and that was giving above-level tests to the kids. There's no point giving a kid a test that make a perfect score, and you don't have enough ceiling. So we decided we'd use the SAT as our SAT math test as our basic test for 7th graders. And we also decided we would study the kids a lot more than that. We'd give a whole day of further testing with every values test, mechanical competence, space relations, knowledge of general science, and so forth. So we also had 2 ideas. One was we'd institute an annual talent search for mathematically talented youngsters. And we would then find something to do for them. You know, there's an old saying: if you want to have rabbit stew, you better catch a rabbit. Otherwise, you may have skunk stew or squirrel stew or something else. Well, we won't catch our rabbits, but we wanted to have the stew too. We wanted to do something with them that would be helpful, facilitate the development, supplement it, special supplemental educational opportunities, not take them out of school. Although later on I've helped create such programs, but at that time there was nothing much to do except to, create summer programs and academic year programs on Saturday. So we worked and we tried all kinds of ways. We taught them 6 hours a day, 1 day a week, and they commuted from as far as 200 miles away to come to the country because there were no opportunities. There just wasn't much for these kids. And we taught in 2 hours, 1 day a week in school. One of our famous little studies was we taught Algebra 1. We got the head of the math department at Loyola College, our local Jesuit school, to teach kids from 4th through 7th grade at a local middle school, 2 hours, 1 day a week. And in 37 hours, they learned more Algebra 1 than the 8th graders in that school, who our comparison group learned. In fact, 1/3 of our students succeeded anyone in the 8th grade class, and 1/3 of the 8th grade class was below anybody in our class. So we kept trying different ways. We finally settled on a 3-week module in the summer, where they came for 3 weeks and they studied. If they wanted to do Algebra 1, they could do it in the summer, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 weeks, plus homework during that time. Then they could go back to school and do Algebra 2 in the fall and not have to be bothered with that easy little Algebra 1 course that 50% of the kids in our study who scored at least 500 on SAT math at age 12, 50% of those already knew more algebra before they started algebra than half the kids know after they finished a year of algebra. So obviously they didn't need the whole year of algebra. So we learned a lot. We learned a lot like that. We kept experimenting along. But by 1979, I lost my first wife. She died after a long siege of cancer. I was a little tired, and I decided that I would give the shop away, and therefore I created programs that we'll talk about a little more as you want to talk about.
How many talent searches did you conduct, Julian, before you gave it away? How many talent searches did you conduct before you gave it away?
We had talent search in March of 72, 73, 74, all up through 79. Yeah, we skipped 1 year, I believe we ran, but we were doing them annually. And we created the note. Now, Louis Terman at Stanford had done a one-shot, one cohort talent search, but he was interested in studying the gifted animal in its native habitat. He wasn't interested in help theoretically, although he couldn't keep his hands off of Cronbach and Sears and people like that. He adopted them and they became his protégés. But we decided we'd have an annual talent search every year, and still going on. I'll tell you a little more about that. And then we would have the regular summer program options, and maybe some during the year too. Most of them during the summer, now residential. So in 1979, we still were commuting program, and people were coming absurdly long distances to get this training. And we didn't have a strong verbal component. Our method was to give the SAT math to students, and those who scored high would get the SAT verbal and get the science knowledge test and so forth. So we instituted the big talent searches. I mean, they're really big, and I'll tell you in a minute how big they are. That would help the youngsters come residentially, would be just as verbal as mathematical, very more verbal courses now. And would be 2-3 week modules in summer. They could come for 3 weeks and say learn Algebra 1, and then 3 more weeks and take something else. Now, some of the courses are enriching courses like anthropology, archaeology, geology, Latin, German, things of that kind. But others were substitutes for the high school courses. My second wife and I pioneered biology and chemistry in the summer. 3 weeks to do all the high school biology first year and get rid of it so you could do the advanced placement biology afterwards. That would, because these kids, we got the first program we had at Franklin Marshall College in biology. We picked 25 youngsters. They came from 12 states. And they were, of course, interested in biology. One of the principles of our program was that you had to be able enough in the field to come, and you had to be interested enough to come, to choose to come. Well, we gave them the College Board's high school biology achievement test, which is a tough test. Relatively few biology students bothered to take it. And they scored, before they took biology, they scored average for that group. Well, after we gave them 3 weeks of biology, they gained 160 points on an average on their 200-800 scale. And none of them gained less than 60. And the guy who gained 60 started at 650, so he went up a good deal too. 2 of them made 800s on it after 3 weeks. It was a big, big success. We chose them pretty carefully, and they were able, and they were tremendously motivated, almost like a football team, the way we trained them. They came into the final exam all revved up and ready to do it. We also did chemistry that summer. It was almost equally successful. Then they did the advanced placement. Of course, by the end of the first year after they took the high school course in the summer, 12 of the 25 had finished advanced placement biology. So it was a big success. It continues now, but probably the selection's a little less rigorous and all. But you can do that. You can in 3 weeks of intensive work, you could give them enough biology, enough chemistry, now enough physics also. We have that now to skip the basic course and then go on to the advanced placement. And since kids don't have much time for APs, many of them just take one or two in the senior year. And incidentally, with a remark someone was making about APs, that you take them in order to impress colleges. Not usually. Usually you take them as seniors, and you don't get the results till the summer after your senior year, so you can't.
It's changed, Julian. They're taking them in 10th grade these days.
Oh no, you can, but many people still just take them. But some of them do, the 10th, 11th grade. They should do that. Of course, that's exactly the point we were making. You should ladder them, you should move them up so you can get the AP scholars. I believe the College Board honors now. How many? Some of them have as many as 12 to 15 AP credits by the time they finish high school, and they get college credit at many places for all those courses. Well, the upshot, I've sort of detoured here. The upshot is that nowadays we started out March of 1972, with 450 kids hastily recruited from the Baltimore area, and we got pretty good results. Nearly all our top 10 got PhDs later, physics and computer science and so forth. And then we went on, and by the time I gave the program up, there may have been 2,000 or so kids, and we were giving the SAT ourselves, and we were scoring them ourselves. We were faster scorers. We had a free set of SATs given to us by ETS, but they were a little slower in scoring them, so we scored them. We were more accurate than they were too. Dan Keating was a master organization for that. But we then gave it away, and we founded something now called the Center for Talented Youth at Hopkins, which runs summer programs, and has grown now to the point where there are 90,000 kids a year in the talent search at Hopkins. And there are 10,000 of the summer programs on 20 campuses across the country from Hopkins. Duke has a similar program. That was another serendipity. The provost from Hopkins had moved down to Duke, and I called him up and said, "You need to have this kind of program." So he set one up. And then Northwestern, where my former student, Dave Wiley, was the dean, George Van Tassel Baskin and I went there and got a program set up, and then Denver set one up. Nowadays, about 250,000 kids take the SAT or the ACT each year. Most of them are 7th and 8th graders when they take the test. And about 20,000 or so go to, at least 25,000 go to summer programs. But a spinoff has been that we've loosened up not only the high schools by setting precedents of various kinds there, we've loosened up the colleges. In fact, all the colleges now, many of them want to offer summer programs. So we have lots of summer programs, which is all to the good. There's still a big market out there.
There are. It's kind of interesting that you picked acceleration when you yourself said you wouldn't have chosen to accelerate when you were a kid. What made you actually go the acceleration routes? Because that really was what that was your trademark, your signature, was that you had accelerated program.
I got a bad reputation early from Joe Bates and Jonathan Edwards because people said, oh, this man is just rabid about acceleration. And one of the programs in the United States, now not one of ours, but at another great university, was founded on that misconception. It's a good program. I'm glad they found it, but I never intended to have a whole stream of 13-year-olds going to college. Nowadays, my rule of thumb is that you should be at least 16 if you're going to be residential, and you probably don't need to skip more than maybe one grade somewhere along the line as you go through, but you need to do other things. You need to take college courses part-time, summer program courses, advanced placement courses, move up in the subject matter in school, participate in the math competitions. One of our prodigies, whom I've known since he was 10 years old, when he made a couple of 800s on the SAT math, broke all the records in the United States for the math counts, high school math exam. He was a gold medal winner in the International Math Olympiad at 15. I mean, that is another accelerative option that most people overlook. The Westinghouse, now the Intel talent search, that way. So I would say now that we don't need, incidentally, the fellow who won all book all the contests could have graduated from college early. He'd taken all the math at the University of North Carolina. Part-time while he was still in high school. He could have graduated in another year, probably. But I talked his parents into sending him to Harvard for 3 years to get an education, a real education. And he took only graduate work in math at Harvard, but he got a summa cum laude degree in 3 years and took it was a good experience. He's now at the Center for Advanced Study at Princeton, a 5-year fellowship in mathematics. Another one from Australia whom we work with recently became a full professor of mathematics at UCLA at 25, he's 25. And he's a specialist in 3 different areas. So it's possible for both of them not to be so extremely accelerated, at the same time be very good and move way ahead in the fields they were especially good in.
Thinking about those kids, remember the Smithsonian article that came out?
Oh, yes.
And they profiled, was it 5? I can't remember.
Those are all accelerants, that's right.
Highly accelerated students. What has happened to all of them?
Well,
but first tell us who they were, and then tell us what happened.
One of them is a professor of quantitative economics at one of the top universities in the country. He was a full professor at Chicago at 32 and had a chair at Caltech at 34. One of them is a physics researcher down at the University of Texas. Let's see. One of them is a computer science professor up at SUNY Stony Brook, and generally that's basically. One of them, though, is a part-time pizza deliverer who plays games all the time. He got interested in games, and he's good at it. He was a good chess player when he came, a good bridge player, and he just likes to play games, so he delivers pizza part-time and plays games that way. So you have some who don't become full professors at 25 or 32.
Well, you know, when you stopped doing talent searches, you picked up another interest that well, what did you do? You specialized.
Oh, yeah. Well, I had to have something that shifted again in 1979. So we started what is now at being followed up, it's still at Hopkins. It's called the Study of Exceptional Talent. And these are youngsters who, before age 13, score at least 700 on SAT math or SAT verbal. I figure that they are, the math people are 1 in 5,000 of the males and 1 in 20,000 of the females in the country. So they're a very, very select group. The verbal is about equal between males and females. Linda Brody at Johns Hopkins runs that program. They have newsletters and a magazine called Imagine and various ways to stimulate these people. Well, these are just super achievers, of course. I remember once at Harvard, 3 of the 5 junior 5/8s were from our group, and every year in the Westinghouse we have, 5 or 6 or 7 top 40 people that way. But we try to stimulate them to do things that way. Another thing I've become extremely interested in, some of you may not have heard of, across the United States there are now 12, at least 12, maybe a few more, special high schools for the gifted. for the talented, oftentimes the mathematical and scientific, but not always. And these schools are usually 2 years, the last 2 years of school, funded by the state, not part of a local education authority. The Illinois program is a 3-year program, and those are wonderful programs. I had some hand in helping them, but my real favorite specialty has been the early entrance to college programs. So as Camilla was saying, I'm still interested in acceleration, but of a different kind. There are 12 of those across the country, and 4 of them are private and predate my efforts. But 2, particularly the Texas Academy of Mathematics and Science. How many have ever heard of the Texas Academy of Mathematics and Science? Have any of you? Not a single person. That's interesting, because that's a big early entrance program in North Texas, University of North Texas. It has about 400 students, 200 a year come at the end of 10th grade and become regular college students. They take college biology for 2 semesters, college chemistry for 2, college calculus, college physics, and then a good deal of social science and humanities work too. Well, I got interested, so I helped create that. I was on the board a long time. I have a little diversion here. There are 2 things you can be if you're a professor and you sideline. One of them is a consultant. The other is what I call an insultant. Now, what's an insultant? A consultant is someone who's called in early enough to help plan something that you can develop. I did that in Texas and did it in Georgia with a program there. An insultant is someone who's come in later, and his job is to insult the people, is to say to them, you should have done it this way. That's wrong. Why didn't you call me earlier? Well, I've been fortunate in those programs to be a consultant rather than an insultant. And the programs have gone very well. They meet the needs of certain students who are willing to go away from home at 2 years early and live in a big dorm on the University of North Texas campus, 400 students in their own dorm, which incidentally is always chosen as the outstanding dorm on the campus every year. And they live together, they socialize, they're the same age, they're all bright, but they're the same age. So it gets around the problem of putting a 14 or 15-year-old into Johns Hopkins and having them try to be 18 years old. It doesn't work very well. We've had a couple of disaster stories of that kind there. But people say, oh, but it's dangerous to put these kids on a college campus. No, they're much safer than they are at home. There never has been a pregnancy attributable to the dorm, as far as I know, at North Texas, but there have been plenty attributable visits home on weekends. I mean, that's the sort of thing that they're sort of protected from. They can't drink. One drink and they're out. They're zero polish alcohol. And you know, Texan high school students aren't usually that abstemious. They're likely to have parties and so forth. So it's really, and the socializing is day and night. They socialize with each other all the time. So it's really a much richer experience. They even have a big all-night non-alcoholic prom, probably one of the nicest in the whole country every year. They're given all kinds of special social and emotional facilitation. 25 or 30 who come to Johns Hopkins transferred at the end of 2 years, typically as juniors at Hopkins, and they've all done well. None of them have dropped out, none of them have flunked out, and none of them have left. Well, one girl left finally. She ran out of money, went back to the University of Texas, but that's the only one we've ever lost.
Now, Julian, talking about that, what are some of the lessons that you've learned? I mean, as you have conducted your work, what are some of the ways that you began in your thinking, and then maybe you changed your mind a little bit? What are some of the lessons that you've learned through your work working with these gifted and exceptional kids over now 30 years?
I've already mentioned that I'm far less in favor of grade skipping than I was before. Simply because we have the other opportunities for the people, and they work out better socially and emotionally. We had one kid who graduated from college at 15 with very high grades, went to a great math graduate school, got his PhD at 20, and couldn't function. He didn't have any social development. He couldn't teach, and he was too upset to do research. Now, we want to avoid that. That was most unfortunate. I didn't have much of a hand in getting him I certainly had no hand getting him into college that early. Came right out of the 7th grade into one of the borough colleges in New York. Made a 3.92 GPA, went on to university. But He was out of work last time I heard. He just couldn't function in research or teaching. We want to avoid that. That's one of the things. I've learned a great deal about creating what I call curricular flexibility, proper articulation of our summer program with the regular year program. I've even developed a concept, Jacques and Moron. Our program is benignly insidious. Now, it's benign because we try to help the kids a lot, but it's insidious from the point of some of the schools because we've clobbered them. We've worked up underground and caused them to set precedents they didn't want to set. So it's much easier now. If you really want to skip a grade, it's much easier. If you want to take Algebra 1 a year early, it's much easier in many schools to do. So we decided long ago we wouldn't work with school boards. There are thousands of school boards in the United States, and they change membership every election, every appointment date. And we decided that wasn't the way to go. We did something radical. We sent the SAT scores to the kid, to the youngster, not to the parents. And we tried to establish as much contact directly with youngsters as we could in order not to have the parents filter through their need system what we were telling them.
How about you? I know we've talked about this, Julian, so I'll prompt you because I think this is interesting. Your interest in your infatuation with high IQ, at least when I started beginning working with you. The more IQ points you could log, the better you were.
I got my comeuppance on that pretty badly. I have two sayings now. One is that you can't major in IQ. Some people try. Look at me, I have an IQ of 180 kind of thing. The second thing is that for a high IQ and $1, you get $1 cup of coffee. You have to be very careful. We had some real duds. We've had two kids with IQs of 212. One of them was in the Guinness Book of World Records for a little while. He's a routine lawyer nowadays. It's okay. He's doing okay. We had another 212 IQ kid who's, last time I heard, they had a very nice little band. She was going around playing cocktail circuits and playing the violin and singing and so forth. She was enjoying it. She did get through college before she did that. Another kid, Camilla, tested with a real IQ of 200. In fact, I didn't trust Camilla because she was so obligated to me, and this was one of my relatives, that I had someone else test the guy, and he had an IQ of real 200. And he did well, tremendously well on SAT and achievement test. But it takes other qualities to use these. I've learned that. You know, I don't even talk about it. This is an intelligence comment. I don't talk about people being intelligent or kids being intelligent. I talk about them being good test takers. Because there are some people who are just good test takers. You put any kind of test under the nose, and they do well on it. But they don't have the other qualities. You know the emergenesis hypothesis, some of you know that, about it takes all the requisite qualities at an acceptable level to be able to do anything. One of our bright kids with an IQ of 200 wouldn't go to class in college. He wouldn't hand his homework in on time. He didn't do well. He didn't graduate well. He graduated, but not with bad grades. No, you've got to have other qualities. So I don't venerate IQs. Now, a person like Lee Cronbach, for instance, who was Terman's student or young examinee with an IQ of 200, he could use it. He used it in his way to be very, very good. An IQ of 200 can be very useful, but only in the context of having the other qualities to use it. I think a lot of the great work in psychology and other places done by people with nice substantial IQs, maybe 140, 130, 150. They just have the other qualities that are needed.
I have some more questions, but I want to make sure that if the audience has any before we run out of time, I can continue on, but I'll have one to close with, so I'll reserve the closing question unless somebody grabs it. Is there any questions in the audience that you have of Julian?
Yeah. Oh, off the show.
On the continuum of giftedness you've dealt with hundreds of
Yeah.
children,
Yeah.
is there any discontinuity at any point in the scale? Is there a point where you're no longer talking about giftedness and something else?
Well, it almost seems that way sometimes. I don't think so. In terms of just test scores of giftedness. Now, if you're talking about genius, you know, of strange things that Einstein and Newton did. But no, I think it's pretty continuous with it. The highest score we ever had was a kid who at age 7, or one of the highest scores, age 7, made a 670 on the math. We had another one that the fellow in Australia made a 760 on the math when he was 8 and so forth. Well, kid made 2 800s when he was 10. So we've had some very, very high scores like that. And when a person makes an 800, you don't know what they really have. It could have been an 840, you know, even at that point. But I think not. I believe there's a strong genetic component in the ability of these extreme kids, and it's sometimes hard to discern from the family line. But it doesn't seem to be any kind of nurture that's bringing this on. It just seems to be the kid has extreme ability and interest early, and then it can be capitalized on. One of the points I want to make is we've never been concerned with developing talent. We've been concerned with finding kids who already had the talent or the promise, the potential, and helping them use it in a subject matter way, academic. We don't deal in thinking skills and creativity, and those common things for the gifted. We deal in enriched, accelerated subject matter. No, Art, I would say, do you think there's any discontinuity? Would you think so?
I think I put the question wrongly.
Yeah.
I doubt if there's any discontinuity in G.
Yeah.
But I think there's probably discontinuities in emergenic qualities.
Oh, that may be true, yes.
Combinations.
That's right. It's hard to separate. Now, one of our kids who with an IQ around 200 who didn't do well has a father who didn't do very well, who's very, very bright, and a mother who very, very bright didn't do very well. So it's hard to know how much bad parenting there was, you know, and how much bad genetics there is in that situation. It's hard to separate them.
There's a question back there.
Right. Well, now the IQ, as you all know, is an aggregate of a lot of things. Now, 212 IQ kids were very different from each other. One was great in the humanities and not quite so good in math. One was good in math and not quite so good verbally. So you need to focus on the specific potential of the youngster. Now, if you're fortunate enough to live in the United States nowadays, there are many programs for these kids. And there's one building up in Britain now. There's one building up there at Warwick University, I believe, at York. Is it Warwick and York? Where they're trying to help the talented. But most countries don't have any extra things to do. They're more or less the way we were in 1971. So you get a mentor for the math talented, get someone to work with them, try to get the schools to exempt them from taking such routine stuff they're so bored with. Each youngster's a different one. We can program a given individual youngster pretty well along the line to help them find ways to do it, but it's an individual matter.
And follow up on that.
Sure.
If you were starting over again, what would you go into?
Statistics, probably. Yeah, I think so. But I got interested in statistics. I mean, as a professional statistician, not as a professor necessarily. Nowadays, the university situation is so different from when I started in 1949 that I'm not sure I'd get into it again. I just don't know whether I'd bother. I think I'd try to maybe get a more. Although I enjoyed teaching, and I certainly enjoy working with these wonderful graduate students I had. Wouldn't have missed that for anything. But I've been fortunate. I had such a different background. I'm the only person in the gifted child field with a background like mine who was a professional teacher of a variety of subjects, chemistry and so forth, and who's strongly statistically oriented. So it's been very helpful to have, and who understood teachers and who understands testing. It was very helpful to have that. I don't know whether I've just been fortunate. I just lucked into it. I don't know whether it would. If the war hadn't come along, I'd probably just stayed a routine high school teacher the rest of my life, very likely. Might have had to be a principal or to make more money. I wouldn't have liked that, I don't think.
Any other questions? Well, then I will ask you my last set of questions.
Okay, all right.
In 50 years, when people look back, what would you like to be known for? What would you like to be remembered for?
Oh, the talent search. Well, there are two different aspects there. I don't know how long people will be. Most people disappear from view. If E.L. Thorndike and a few others are still cited, but I think my greatest contribution, remember, we're dealing with 250,000 kids a year now in our talent searches. So I've had indirect contact with billions of kids. So we've affected the gifted child field a great deal, I think. The verbal and mathematical. We've been dealing with verbal reasoning and mathematical reasoning skills there. I think I'd like to be known for the programs, the talent search and the summer programs, the academic emphasis that was almost missing from these programs in 1971 that we put into it at that time.
Mm-hmm. And so what is that what has given you the most satisfaction in terms of your professional life? Working with these kids, developing those programs?
It's been very, very rewarding. I hear from them every week, one of the kids from the first talent search, 1972, showed up the other day, and one of them came back, one who didn't seem to like as much, gave us $55,000 for our scholarship programs. And I really do, I'm thrilled when someone becomes a full professor at 25 or does something equally. One of my most interesting students, this is, we will keep you too long. One of my prodigies finished the University of California at Berkeley in mathematics, summa cum laude at 19. He was the university's math valedictorian there. I think they had something called valedictorian there. They had about 100 graduates in math. What did he do? I've been talking about professors here, all of them become professors. No, he headed for Chicago and became a in finance. He's now in London, some places, president or vice president of some big firm. He had no interest in being a mathematician. He was awfully good at math, but he wanted to be in finance and business. So right at 19, he got right into it. He's there still. So a lot of these people don't have academic interests. They don't want to be professors. Some of them don't even want a PhD degree. They get the MBA, a law degree, a med degree, and go on from there.
Well, Julian, that's the last question, the very last one. So you look over your whole professional career, 65 years, I think that's what you said, 65 years, which is a long career, and you can do a lot of different things in 65 years. But do you have any regrets?
Yeah, I have one regret, and I've talked with Dave Lubinsky about this. In my early days, I didn't have good enough sense to publish my very almost esoteric, difficult articles in the right places. I sacrificed a number that belonged in Psychometrica, but to the Journal of Experimental Education. Nobody read that kind of material in that journal at that time, but I was so untutored and naive that I wrote these, what I consider pretty excellent papers and put them in obscure sources. And so I lost the impact of quite a few of them that way. And if I had that to do over, I would certainly do what Lee Cronbach told me. He published a few little flimsy things at the first part of his career, and then one day he sat down and said, I'll publish nothing in the future except something that's important places. And from then on, that's what he did. It's good advice. If you want to be cited, you have to publish where you're cited. If you want your work to be known, you have to do it there. So give careful thought and get advice from others about what to do. David Lubinsky, I think, is a model of that. He works hard to get his papers in the right places because he wants them to be part of the literature of the field. And that's what I think we should all think about. I feel a little sorry for the journals that aren't selected, though. It would get many of the best papers that way.
Well, I had to conclude that if that's your regret, you've led a pretty darn good life.
I've had a very nice life. I've been unduly fortunate. As I say, I could have just been an ordinary, routine high school teacher all my life, except for the war and the GI Bill. I'm so grateful to the GI Bill. It was a wonderful way to motivate. How many of you in here use the GI Bill? Several of you must have. Yeah, okay. And you know what I mean by that. They gave us enough to subsist on, and it encouraged us to go on to graduate work by doing that. Well, thank you very
Thank
much.
you,
It's a pleasure
Julian.
to be here.
Yes.